Hi, I'm Sigmund. Hello, everyone. Need Eloise Jill Francis. My name is Jill Francis. I am the project coordinator for NSEC, working as the Mi'kmaq Forestry Liaison and at the Center of Forest Innovation. It's my privilege to represent my former work and colleagues from Kejimkujik for the project we would like to update everyone on. This project is based on a workshop that was held at Wildcat Community Center in March 2020 with a group of collaborators, representatives from various organizations, and the discussion focused on mapping ecological and cultural values in the Mersey and Bear River watersheds in southwest Nova Scotia in an area known as traditional district of Kespukwitk. And so what we're seeing here on the map is the red rectangle, which was chosen to represent the corridor or the study area that was looked at for our project. And within this map, you can see in yellow that there is Kejimkujik lies at the heart of the corridor, and then at the bottom or the Atlantic coast is Kejimkujik Seaside. Storymap itself, won't have time to go through all of that today, so I just brought up a few slides to represent snapshots of the live version. The live version will eventually be available to the public. It's still in a work in progress and currently in translation. So it will be accessible from Kejimkujik, a website, but we'll be able to link to that and send that out to partners at a later date. So it's on a platform called ArcGIS Storymap, and it is a paid subscription service. And there are many people who worked on the Storymap itself. And we see here below, again, it's a very, very long and lots of information to have a look at. So it's very hard to put that all into this presentation, but I will just shortly go through the 4 tabs that we have divided the Storymap into, and the first one being the ecological values. Ecological values. Under this section, we have included a few habitats or ecological zones. The first one being freshwater aquatic ecosystems, which there's information about species at risk and ecosystem threats. For this area, it would be dams, water level change, road traffic, and invasive species. The next ecosystem is the forested ecosystem, which also has information about species at risk, forest loss illustration, and for an example, one of the maps that's contained within the section is the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid detections from 2017 to 2021, and this is an animated map. Once you're able to view it live, this will populate itself from 2017 to 2021. And then another ecosystem we see within the corridor is the coastal ecosystems, and then again data and maps are shown to illustrate species at risk. Well, there's mention of species at risk. There's no maps that pertain to sensitive information such as that within this story map, and also ecosystem threats are mentioned. And also within this section, there's information about cultural keystone species, specifically ones the Kejimkujik staff have done some work on with Mi'kmaq partners in regards to moose, sweetgrass, and American marten. People on the land, which really focuses on cultural values, cultural mapping within the corridor, and it starts out with the waterways. So the first screenshot that I've chosen to illustrate this so it's clear, the 2 watersheds that are represented within this corridor. Of course, the Bear River at the very top near the Bay of Fundy, and then the other one stretching to the Atlantic coast being the Mersey River watershed. And this one, particularly easy to see how they stretch across that landscape and how important they are as travel routes and ways to get across from one area to another in the corridor. Is a bit more about people on the land. We have Kespukwitk to illustrate the Bay of Fundy. We move across, and this is the first Mi'kmaq community that is on the landscape in the corridor. There are many more as we move through, and we have those shown later on in the story map. But for example, Kespukwitk Bear River translates into cutting through high rocks. And interestingly, to link some of the information and cultural detail, a traditional route called the Seven Paddles route was mapped in yellow to illustrate that. Also later on, there's a few maps that show some portages, some of these really old canoe routes, as well as eskers, so certain geographical features that link Kejimkujik to Kespukwitk. And so other interesting pieces that as we go through people on the land, we see communities, we have information, Glooscap myths that mention specific place names in the area, and some interesting historical writings, which I'll talk about a bit later in one of my examples. And then another section that we have is the geospatial viewer. So this really is where much of the data is concentrated, and so maps are used to illustrate the values throughout the whole story map, but this is where I call it the choose your own adventure. You can bring up those different layers, you can mix and match and have a look at them. There's a few dozen layers to have a look at, and you can just sort of see an example, and when it's live again you can scroll through and have a look at more of them. One of the images, one of the large part of this project was to work on what's called historical air photo mosaic, and so this was a special project where photos were purchased from the National Air Photo Library, so the photos dating from 1929 to 1931, and GIS specialists were contracted to create a smooth mosaic of these air photos, and in total there are about 80 photos over the northern park, Kejimkujik Park extent, and then about 316 photos for the southern extent of the park, and then 127 photos from the Lake Rossignol area. And they did go from 1928 to 1929 to illustrate the area at that time. And so they were created into one large area, smoothed out, and it's very hard to see again. It's much more comprehensible when you can interact with this and zoom in and zoom out. So this is just again just a snapshot, and so this covers Lake Kejimkujik and the Lake Rossignol area. Very specialized software used to do this kind of work, and it is an incredibly detailed resource. We just can't zoom in on the presentation, but I will give just a bit of an example, hopefully to illustrate. So going to the geospatial viewer again, you can scroll down that list of layers, and one of the layers is an actual 1919 guides map. So it's a hand-drawn map. It was scanned and georeferenced as best as it could be. It was hand-drawn and published in 1919 for the Dominion Atlantic Railway, and it focused on routes for guides, and so it showed portages, guiding routes, and logging roads and things like that. So it's quite an interesting snapshot of what was happening in the area at that time. And so when you go to the geospatial viewer, you have to click on it, and you can actually zoom in, and there's the three dots. You can sort of click on those and it'll bring up a transparency scale, which is interesting. So you can set that scale so you can then make it a little more transparent, and then so you can easily overlay that to other layers, and so you can sort of do comparisons and things like that. So the other layer I put up here, it's harder to see, but it is the mosaic from the previous slide. So we have the air photo mosaic, then we have set the transparency so that we can see through to see the 1919 guides map with that. And so what we get is this image. So we get a good view of the 1919 guides route through the area, so the dotted line. So off to the left-hand side of the screen will be the fourth lake, and then you can sort of see some information there. It says bungalow, barn, and screecher, which you can sort of see the word there. So the dotted line represents a canoe route symbol, so that would have been one of the preferred canoe routes to go, and then the dash line going up to the point of land is a woods road, and you can just kind of see some buildings represented in the area. So a long time ago, this screecher area, well, prior to the dams, was a long, low spit. And this is a description taken from Thomas Redall's writings, which are also referenced within the story map itself, and a link to some of that to the resources. And so this long, low spit of land separated Fourth Lake from Rossignol, and it had just a tiny stream flowing through the tip. And it was a favorite camping place for hunters. It had an ancient clearing with a scatter of graves shaded by big beech and birch trees. In the 1880s, loggers dug a mound and discovered a giant human skeleton. That was later taken to a museum in the United States. It was given the name of Kaduska, and early loggers about the lakes weren't really clear about that name, but anyways, then it ended up with this name called the Screecher. And so the story goes, in the old days, there's a little waterfall near the camping place, and where Fourth Lake flowed into Rossignol. And anyone approaching it in calm weather, especially on a still night, they could hear the sound of this waterfall, and it was likened to the sound of a moose or other large animal urinating into a pool. And so the story goes, Kadusk is a Mi'kmaq verb to urinate. And so when Mi'kmaq people were asked who they were familiar with the area, when they were asked this question, what did that sound translate to? And people would say, well, what kind of sound? And they would say, was it a loud sound? And the Mi'kmaq people, being polite and not wanting to say an offensive sort of word, would say yes. Yeah, and they would say, well, is it a loud sound, like screeching? And they'd be like, yes, like that. So they would agree, and then that's supposedly one of the stories of how it got the name, the Screecher. But whether or not that's the truth, that's the name that stuck, and it was known as a pleasant little camping place, and it was at the outlet of the Fourth Lake. So you can see it's clearly seen here. And we go back to the layer list, and we turn off the 1919 guides maps and just click onto that, and then we're left without that transparency. And you can actually clearly see I've got these two little red arrows that point to that little tiny stream trickling through that area, and you can kind of think, well, yeah, that probably did make some sort of sound, water going through there. And so when we go to the next slide, it's dramatically different. If we turn the layers off completely, we take away the map, we take away the historical photo layer, we can see what we're left with today, and this is the satellite-based map from ArcGIS. So the stories are still there. They are somewhat, we hope, within the story map itself, but they are still there to be discovered with some of the resources that are held within the story map. Introduction to, and to let people know that this is part of the project, and we can't wait to share it with the public. It couldn't have happened without many contributors. We tried to include everybody in the credits, and we have also put many links to different organizations and supporters and people who shared data and information, and we tried to acknowledge and link as many people as we could think of. If more questions or want to know more about it, the contacts are listed here, and we have them. And on behalf of everybody, and I just want to say thank you very much and appreciate your time and attention.